So, what did you think about the Olympics?
Uh,
No, we're just
what was that?
we're just jumping into it.
Yeah, let's, man. For one, it was a very odd thing to kind of watch when because okay, it was actually a really, really helpful moment to understand a lot of what's been going on. Because that the whole thing, I don't know how much of it people watched or if they just saw the screenshots, but you don't have to watch the whole thing to really get what was going on. But it was called a celebration of freedom, or man's search for freedom. And I looked at it and was like, oh, this is perfect. This is an exact uh, moment so we can see the different views of freedom. We can see the different definitions of freedom, but that's not how most people. I think most people. It's more fun to just get mad and call people names. But man, it was
wait, keep working
a
through that.
Nietzschean display
Keep working through. That's interesting.
of the modernist definition of freedom, because they had celebrations of Dionysius. They had the celebration of the beheading of the queen in the French Revolution. So it's all of the freedom from any kind of limitation, freedom from any kind of it's that freedom from the limitations, freedoms from the your own nature, freedom from external limitations and internal limitations. And it's really okay. So Nietzsche had this theory of the Apollonian and the Dionysian swings of history, and the Apollonian is the external controls, the internal, as well as the desire for internal order. And the Dionysian principle was the removal of controls and the loss of, or the freedom from, all internal and external limitations, and that those two things were kind of at war with one another as principles, or working together to push history forward. And that was what caused history to move forward. And that Nietzsche was a he was a classicist. He taught ancient Greek literature. He's a big reason that the shift away from the centrality of Roman literature in a classics education has shifted to the centrality of Greek literature. And so he has this whole theory about history moving forward by means of these two definitions, or these two principles within humanity. One is a principle of ordering, a principle of limitation, and one is a principle of what he called freedom. But it was freedom from any sort of external limitation, and freedom from an internal slavery to your own nature. So you saw this celebration of freedom, using all of the images of the West, but in a opposite way, right? So when you have this celebration of freedom, and then you have the decapitated head of the queen singing about the freedom, or singing for the freedom, with sort of a heavy metal riff sort of thing, and then I couldn't tell if they were just supposed to be pyrotechnics, or if they were trying to make it look like they were burning down the building. But either way,
You mean when the blood gushing out. I thought that was blood. Yeah, that one time where they had all the in
Oh,
front of
is
the building with that was
yeah,
when you see the little rays of thing, that was
yeah.
just explosions of blood, like, from the decapitations is what I played that as.
Okay. So, but you could tell, but they weren't. It was a celebration of the French Revolution. It
Mhm.
was. This was this moment of freedom when we were freed from the king and the queen, I guess, or probably they would think of it as freed from the old order of Western civilization, and we got to begin actually having the freedom to do what we wanted, and that just involved a lot of death and destruction. But that revolution is what brought about the freedom of the present, all the way up to the Dionysian reenactment of the Lord's Supper, which a bunch of people recognized it as the Lord's Supper. They called it the Lord's Supper. And then people were like, well, no, that was actual Dionysius. And everybody was like, oh, okay. I mean, there were some people that were like, that doesn't make it better, which is true. But there were other people that said, oh, I guess I just didn't understand. That was supposed to
Right.
be Dionysius.
Right.
But
In that case, I'll give you a pass because that
yeah.
wasn't filthy.
I mean, Paul is the one who tells us that this is that history is a competition of tables, right? It's the table of the Lord versus the table of demons. It's
I'm
not
still
like
in that. I'm still in that. You're gonna hear it on the show.
okay.
What verse? What verse? What chapter?
What does he say? I don't. You have to look for it. But it's the whole idea that, well, of course, Dionysius had a table. Dionysius was the god of wine. He's the god of he's basically the god of he's Bacchus was his Greek name, Dionysius, and so he's the god of wine. He's the god of celebration. He's the god of breaking the rules or subversion. If you read his stories, it's the celebration of one day where adultery is allowed, that sort of thing. And it almost always in the old stories ends in violence, right? So he's sort of the god of sexual violence, as well as drunkenness. He's the god of wine. But he's also the god of celebration, right? So what happened to him through the through the Christianization of the Western education was he got basically he got trimmed down to just the god of festival, kind of the god of harvest and festival, and so he was used symbolically often to talk about the when wine came to fruition and you were ready to uncork it, fall festivals, harvest festivals, and
Jason.
but that's not what he was in amongst the ancient Greeks. Yeah, you have a question?
Yeah, I was just thinking, let's just say that was the case though. Like I'll give him that. Like I know I shouldn't. Okay, so I know I shouldn't give him that he's got a festivals. But that's still very blasphemous.
Well,
Right?
but the how the high medievals, kind of medievals and high medievals, how they used the gods and the goddesses of the ancient world was to be able to layer things together poetically,
I
right?
get that.
So
Yeah.
so because they had been the G.K. Chesterton wrote a biography of Saint Francis, and he talks about the way in the ancient world people were terrified of the gods, and but then when you meet the gods again amongst the medievals, they are a tool that the poets use to be able to bring things together in kind of poetic shorthand, right? So if if you are trying to say, you want to say something about a person, let's say that this person is a woman is very attractive, then you can say, oh, she's like Helen, right? A human kind of attractiveness. Or you can say, well, she was like Venus, which means that the divine beauty is shining through her, right? So they kind of made this poetic shorthand out of the gods, and there might be people that think that was a bad idea, but they didn't believe in the gods, so they weren't.
Well, and
They had basically taken the gods and used them as a tool because they were no longer afraid of them. And Chesterton talks about what the process was historically to neuter the gods of anything that we would have think of as fearful or powerful at all.
Well, okay, and I get what you're saying there, but at this point, the way that they're viewing the gods is kind of, so you go through the Old Testament and you see, I think we even talked about this, the wave offerings and the grain offering and the harvest offerings and the first of the harvest, and these are things that go to God, right? These are the first fruits,
right?
And so there is, and then here we are at the Olympics, and whatever they're trying to do, they're trying to tell you, even if they got the wrong reading of the gods, they're trying to tell you, here's the gods of our harvest.
Right. Well, this is why I thought, oh man, this is gonna be great for the conversation. It was a terrible thing that they did.
Yes.
But what they tried to do was move the imagery in the other direction.
Yes.
Right. So the Last Supper, or the painting of the Last Supper, as well as just the actual Eucharist, is a complete it is a hammer in the nail, or it's a hammer nailing a nail in the head of Dionysius, because it's not that Jesus doesn't say, hey, we're going to reject the Dionysian festivals, we're going to reject the celebratory life, right? He takes it and he takes wine and he rips it out of the hands of Dionysius and he says, no, that's mine, right? He takes wine and makes it into a different symbol, so that now wine points to Christ on the cross, right? It points to Jesus's blood. It points to the forgiveness of sins, rather than wine pointing to an escape from reality, an escape from limitations, right? Which is what wine was for Dionysius. If you talk to alcoholics, often this is one of the hardest things. It's the physical addiction is not nearly as hard as the psychological addiction of how drunkenness makes you feel like you can do anything, right? Drunkenness, misusing wine in that sort of way makes you feel like there aren't any limitations. That's why there's so many jokes about, what are the dumb things you do when you're drunk that you wouldn't ever do sober, right? It's because there is a misuse of wine that gives you the illusion of no limitations, that you aren't limited by your nature anymore. And that was how the ancients wanted to use wine, and why Dionysus, as the god of wine, was also the god who could free you from the limitations of your nature. That's why a trans person is a Dionysian symbol, right? That because they're saying, well, I know that I was born with this biological limitation, but here I am going to declare myself not a man anymore, I'm a woman. You say, well, but your body still tells you that. But I have religiously exceeded my limitations, right? So it's a weird sort of solo fide. By declaration, I am a new creature. I am a new being. Sola fide and solo fide are not the same. A lot of Americans do actually hold to something more like solo fide rather than sola fide, but that's for another day. But Dionysius takes this idea, or Dionysius is this god who can transform you and change you into a different creature that you and by means of wine. Well, and that's because God put into wine alcohol, right? It's a something that is actually a powerful thing, a powerful substance, and when it's used in the right way, it's incredibly powerful for community, for the proper, the proper use of it is incredibly strong. So when Jesus says, here, this table is going to be here at the center of my kingdom, he is in direct opposition to Dionysus, and he won. I mean, he won the first few rounds, right? In the West, Dionysus is forgotten. Most people didn't recognize Dionysus when they saw him at the Olympics, right? He'd been forgotten, just like Isaiah promised. So when they have to come and say, no, this is Dionysus, they go, oh, people go, oh yeah, that's right. Okay. I've heard that name, Bacchus. I've heard that name. And so it's kind of an amazing attempt to reassert Bacchus, reassert Dionysus by putting him at the head of the Lord's Supper. It's an attempt to reclaim wine. Now it's not going to work. Jesus doesn't put up with it. We've seen this over and over and over throughout history, but it is an honest it is something that they're doing that's finally honest, right? They say, look, the French Revolution, we were freed from all of those old limitations where you weren't allowed to cut people's heads off, you weren't allowed to kill people, and you weren't allowed to sleep with anyone you want, you weren't allowed, all of those quote unquote limitations. When you've got this understanding of freedom is freedom from limitations versus what the Bible says, which is it's freedom to serve your neighbor. It's freedom to have control of yourself. It's freedom to serve the Lord and become who you were intended to be. It's not freedom from the limitations of reality. It's freedom to be able to live according to reality. Those two competing tables, one which is promising freedom from reality and one that is putting you back into reality. It's a return to reality. It's a oh man, how would you put it? We're being knit at the table. We're being knit back into reality.
Can I, this is, I've been really spending some time listening to James Jordan again, and he does such a great job of taking all the patterns and reassembling them for you to see, not really reassembling them, helping you to see the narrative that's really there in front of you, which is the restoration of the garden. Right. Everything is the restoration of the garden plus better garden coming, right? And so everything else that is fighting against that narrative is decreation. Anything. So Dionysus, that's decreation language. It's trying to destroy the reality that really is there, and the reality of what Christ's victory on the cross really has done in continuing that restoration. So in times in history, especially biblical one, this is why it's so important to have a biblical education, is because it lets you know what you're seeing in front of you and how to deal with it and kind of where you're at in the story. Anyway, I think that was, is that?
Yeah, exactly. Because the promise of Dionysus and the Dionysian, the Bacchanalian promise, just project for the human race. And this is something that I think we need to understand is the gods of the ancient world, they always promised something. Right? They came with particular promises, but they couldn't. they didn't actually fulfill their promises, but it also was always a twist on one of God's promises taken out of context and promised in a different but you were promised it in a way other than being faithful to the Lord and receiving it as a gift, right? Which is how God fulfills his promises, right? And so, from the beginning, Satan's promise is you will be like gods, right? uh he leads with the promise. Well, the promise of Bacchus is a return to the garden by means of drunkenness, right? The problem is and wine does come from the garden. Wine is a symbol of the garden. Wine is a symbol of the establishment of God's people in their place, right? Because you can't make wine quickly, right? Wine takes time. You have to be in the same place long enough for the wine to mature, right? Wine has always been a symbol of return, of establishment, and it's the garden in a bottle, right? It's fruit brought to maturity in a bottle. So it is a return to the garden in a real sense. But his promise, Bacchus promises that the misuse of wine is going to return you to the garden, but it actually it dislodges you, right? You can't garden drunk. Right? You aren't able to transform the garden drunk. You actually lose access to what it took to make the wine if you misuse the wine, right? But
this is witchcraft. This is exactly
it's witchcraft. Yeah. And this is why avoiding wine is the wrong move, right? I know. So I've met folks that they had alcohol. They had serious problems with alcohol. They go through AA, whatever they get, and then they say, look, I can't drink, but that doesn't mean that I think everybody in the world can't. And I'm happy to be with my brothers and sisters. They still take communion, and then you meet the people that say the world must be transformed because I can't handle wine, right? That is actually a Bacchanalian or probably Apollonian, but it's the Freudian understanding of addiction, that the world has to change for me to be able to control myself or for me to be able to deal with my internals, right? But so it's not that every single person has to have alcohol. But a community that doesn't gather in and receive the gifts of God is a community that well, here I'm going to tell a story. So Mormons used to come to my door all the time. I've been since blacklisted, but the question I often start with is, oh yeah, come in, can I get you a glass of wine or a beer? Which I just think is funny because they say no, right? Or coffee. Yeah, how about a hot drink? And then they're like, uh-oh, this guy knows his stuff, we're in trouble. But they usually say, well, and when they say no, we don't drink, I say, oh, well, that's the difference between Mormonism and Christianity, right? Is we have wine and communion and you guys don't. And they every single time they say, well, but that's not a big difference. That's not a big difference. And the response is, well, it means it's a different God, right? My God gives wine as a gift, and he says, when you come to gather together with me, bring some, we're going to drink together. Your God says, hey, don't touch that stuff, right? We're not dealing with the same God anymore if your God says, don't touch that stuff, right? When my God says, that's a good gift that I created and gave you, and I want you to bring some so we can drink together. We're dealing with two, and the story that Mormons tell is, well, people, and I say, because the Bible obviously has wine in it. Jesus obviously has wine. So, well, people used to be stronger. Now, like, well, yeah, okay. If that's the case, then your God is bad at his job. If people are getting weaker and weaker and weaker, they can't receive these gifts, these good gifts. So, I think there's something central that God has given us in wine as a central symbol of our relationship with him, a central symbol of what Jesus has done on the cross, right? His blood became wine, right? The the way that there's a maturing process, that in the Old Testament the priests in the God's presence had to dump the wine out, but in the New Testament, in God's presence, we drink the wine with him, right? There's all sorts of symbolism going on there. And the attempt to return it to Dionysius's table is an attempt to say, we have conquered Jesus, right? That Dionysus has conquered Jesus, right? So it doesn't make it better. It makes it so much worse to put Dionysus, that Jesus was a part of the old order, right? That Jesus was a part of late stage capitalism or something like that, right? Like that the old order has been conquered the same way that the king and the queen were killed when the French Revolution came about. Well, now we've also gotten rid of the table of the Lord, because now Dionysius is sitting at the table of the Lord. That is actually what they're trying to do. That is actually modernism's project, right? And is to, I mean, that the Dionysus gives you power over reality, right? You hear about him in books like the Metamorphoses, right? The books about transforming nature, the transformation of people into animals and animals into people. Right? These books that you get, Dionysus gives you power over reality. So you don't have to submit to reality, that through his power and through his magic, you can transform reality into what you want it to be. You can get control of reality. Well, that's modernism's project, right? That's statism's project. That's every centralizer's project. That's the World Economic Forum's
Yeah,
project,
that's universalism.
right?
Yeah. Keep going.
That's
I'm listening.
universally modernism's project, is to get control over reality, so we no longer have to submit to it, so that we can control it, right? That we can make it into what we want. That through surgery, a boy can become a girl. That's nonsense. That is nonsense. It's magical thinking.
Not
That's
even in
Dionysian
surgery.
thinking.
Not even in surgery.
Right.
It's just
Right.
in the mind. You just got to think it, right?
Put on a dress. I mean, this is where you got the wild things where it's like somebody can, with a straight face, say, "Well, that woman's that woman's penis." You go, that's a nonsense phrase. That's like that square's fifth side, right? It's a nonsense phrase. That the corner on that circle, right? It's a nonsense phrase. But here we are. But Dionysius promises that nonsense phrases can be made a reality through his powers.
Oh man, Jason, I'm sitting here. I don't want to do it here because, yeah, we're doing something different. I'm thinking about the top 10 takeaways from this whole event. And I don't think it's separated from the conversation we were having last week about King Alfred the Great in education.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And so I'm just looking. Go ahead.
Well, because it's one of the reasons that the French legal theory at that is one of the reasons that Alfred well,
Oh, take it. Oh, wait.
Yeah.
You're deep in thought. You want to explain a lot, and you're trying to edit it. Do not
Yeah.
do that.
I
Nah, take it all.
Also wondering how far do you back up? So the Roman Empire,
Back up all the way and take me there. I'm here for it.
So the Roman Empire conquered the Grecian Empire, or the Hellenistic Empire, and took over. the the Athenian understanding of the law and was they had kind of they had a realist understanding of the law that was fundamentally connected to the tribal history, the city, and that then became city states. And then it became an empire, but it was really an expansion of the city state legal system, which is local, which is personal, which is where the community as a whole is in charge of judging and providing justice. Right, that was expanded out into an imperial understanding by Alexander the Great, and so you had the Greek legal system, the Athenian legal system, really, that expanded out. It couldn't accomplish that personalization because they in an empire you can't have the same sort of personalization. Well, the Romans brought an efficient bureaucratic understanding with them to an understanding of justice, and so you had the efficient bureaucracy conquer the Athenian personalized law or local law, and so the Roman Empire for a long time had the Pax Romana. It was because you had this really historically important balance between the personal legal system of Athens, or the local legal system of Athens, and the efficient bureaucracy of the Romans. Once it overextended itself, and got beyond it, overextended itself in two ways. The same thing happened to the people in Athens when their empire overextended itself. One, you started having the people no longer believe in the rhetoric of the empire, right? So it was big, it was out there, and we're doing good things out there. We're bringing the light of imperial order out to everyone, and you started having the people's hearts say, "What if we're not the good guys?" Right? So that was the beginning of the fall of the Roman Empire. The other thing that happens when an empire overextends itself is people get real gay, right? Everywhere. It happened in every empire that overextends itself. People start to just start to gay, and then they get
Why?
I think that it is because they don't believe in the future anymore. They don't, and so two guys, I don't know, sleeping together, whatever you want to call it,
Sodomizing each other.
Sodomite and a catamite aren't going to produce any future.
Right. It's
And
fruitlessness.
It's fruitlessness, and it is a reflection of the belief that the empire doesn't have a future. And because it's almost always the ruling class that gets really into it, and it is a self-centered act. It's a self-focus act, and you no longer. So it's an expression of hopelessness. There isn't any future, and so I'm not going to be a part of it. But you see it happen in the British Empire. You see it happen in the French Empire. You see it happen in Rome. You see it happen in Greece. So it's not what we are going through isn't an uncommon thing.
Can I?
It's
Can
the
I? I don't want you to forget where you're at in the conversation, and then just in this because we just double clicked into this. We're Inception right now,
Yep.
but this seems a little different though, Jason. Only because this is the first time, at least that I can think of, and I don't have that much of a historical um, uh, history roadmap, but I can't remember where the whole world's experiencing it at one time. That's what makes this different to me because this is world experiencement and which is on a different level than an empire or one empire at different times kind of going through it. This is all of the empires in having the same problem at one time. We're at a completely different point, I think, in history. Am I right to think that way?
well, I think that that
And I think we have to be that way only because of the cross has done
yeah,
something, right?
I think that Western civilization um is actually more fundamentally connected than we realize.
Mm.
Um, I mean the
Right. Which
right,
would make
so
sense.
the last Holy Roman Empire, the Holy Roman Empire actually almost made it to 1900. Right. I think we don't realize that Christendom was still officially like we think of the Roman Empire as ending in, depending on who you talk to, 300 or 400 or but the the what happened was the Roman Empire was actually just converted and it became Christendom
Right.
and it continued to expand. The Holy Roman the last Holy Roman Emperor is the 1890s when they didn't replace the Roman Emperor. So the you start getting the communist revolutions. I mean, you get the 17, the basically the 1800 because you just had the French Revolution. You start getting the memory holing of the American Revolution into something that it wasn't. Uh, the 1800s, you start getting this revolutionary fervor that's building a little bit, but it's really that you suddenly get you start getting actual revolutions, overthrowing of royal houses, and so that by the time you get to 1917, I guess, with the fall of the Russian, um, it's hard to say exactly, but yeah, 1917, maybe the fall of the Russian royal house, that you get kind of the end of the old world. That's not that long ago. I mean, it's 100 years ago, that you've
Well, even in the
had.
coronation of the king recently, um, super Christian, right? Like that's still
Well, yeah, you still. I mean, I think we're seeing a major swing. It's funny when people start to say that this populist swing is anti-democratic. Um, I don't know what that means. Like when this population is voting in an anti-democratic way, we've got to stop this vote because they're voting anti-democratically. This is literally what a democracy. But anyway, that's a dictionary. Um, that's an attempt to control the reality by means of the dictionary.
okay.
But so should I back up to
Yeah.
the
That's where I was going to
Roman
go.
Empire?
Yeah.
So the Roman Empire starts to fall, and you start having the shifting around of where the center of the empire is. But the wherever the empire recenters, the thing that they end up taking with them is the bureaucratic efficiency mindset. That bureaucratic efficiency mindset, and that it ended up landing in France, and the French legal system of the Middle Ages all the way up until through the assumptions of the French legal system. You see this in the Canadian legal system. You see this anywhere the French settled. The assumption is that that bureaucracy and code systems are how you make laws. So you have a system of codes, big books full of how to deal with every single situation.
Case
So
laws.
no, it's the opposite of case laws.
Their version of case laws, yeah.
Yeah, it's their version of case laws. It's so case law says here is the thing that we're judging on, and we're going to withdraw a principle.
Yeah.
And then that principle is handed forward to the next generation. And then they take the principle and they apply the principle in a new situation. They adjust the principle if they need to. They bring it back into a principle.
Right. Based off of the foundation of the law itself. So that's how they keep
based off of
safe.
So the principle is a legal principle that's based on a small number of legal assumptions.
Yeah.
So you have legal assumptions, legal principles that are drawn from those legal assumptions. Those legal principles then are judged. You judge situations as to whether or not somebody broke the law or didn't based on the principles.
David Fowler's having a fit right now. He's like, yeah, yeah, boy.
Right? So that's Deuteronomy.
Yep.
After Moses has spent 40 years judging according to the 10 commandments, he says, here are cases that helped me understand the principles of the application of the 10 commandments. The imperial law of France is a code-based system, right? So you start at the top and you say, well, here is the principle, here's how it applies in this situation, and if it applies that way in this situation, here's the 45 options of what might happen, and here's what you do in all of these. And so the judge, or what he does is he reads through, and he's really a bureaucrat, right? Going through the system and saying, well, here is what to do in this situation. Right. So it, rather than growing wise people who then make judgments, right? You have people whose whole job is to not think about the law, but to think about the code system. Well, in America now, what we have is those two things laid on top of one another.
Yeah.
Right.
That's so true.
Because the Anglo-Saxons, because Alfred pushed the Anglo-Saxon system forward, and then Edward Longshanks, and then you have the French come up and they begin exerting significant influence. I mean, it's the same reason that we call it a cow when it's alive, but we call it beef when it's cooked, because the Anglo-Saxons were the shepherds and the French were the chefs. And so beef is the French word for cow. And, so they also brought their legal understanding, and they ended up trying to combine them together, went to America, tried to reestablish more of an Anglo-Saxon system. Thomas Jefferson said, instead of teaching Latin, which is the language of French law, let's teach Anglo-Saxon in our schools, and establish more of the Anglo-Saxon and the Celtic mindset.
It's funny, you listen to some folks now and you would think that Anglo-Saxon and French are synonymous.
Right, yes. but Old French is where we get a lot of our Latin vocabulary, the vocabulary based on Latin. But Anglo-Saxon is still where we get our grammar for the most part. And we get the second biggest portion of our vocabulary comes from Anglo-Saxon, and then Celtic is next.
But we're just a bunch of mutts, ain't we? Just all
mixed
in.
But English has a system for integrating other languages into it, right? English is the kind of language that takes other languages into back alleys and mugs them and comes out with all the best stuff.
So it's the colonizer is what you're saying.
It is, as languages go. It's really good at,
you can't take
because
languages
of its grammar. It can actually take other languages in and synthesize them.
Why are we rejecting that reality right now? Because I think you're right. I think English does do that. And I think it's had a good history of doing that because of the foundations in which it's built upon, right? So you have Christianity being the foundation, seeing Imago Dei in every man, right? And figuring out how does this come together as one unit underneath that banner. You know what I mean? Where instead of, and finding out where is the realities of the truth of the gospel inside of these languages, and how do they fit together with us in that way, right? I think that's something I don't want to lose. I think that's I think that's true.
Right.
But it has a rinsing and a cleaning process. So
right.
Instead of saying, like, I would say, instead of the back alley, it's actually a wash machine, right? It takes other.
When it's functioning properly. Yeah.
That's good. That's good.
But
so it could be a back alley situation, or it could be a wash machine situation.
So the Anglo-Saxons were they were pirates that conquered England. And I think we never really lost the fundamental piracy amongst the English speaking peoples.
Right.
I mean, I always think it's funny that that when we tell stories, the pirates are almost always the good guys, but that's not new. That's not a modern thing. Like the Americans and the English have always kind of viewed the pirates as the good guys. And I think it's because we were pirates that conquered England.
I like to think it's just that post-millennial dominion mindset. I don't think of it as piracy.
Totally. Yeah. No, but I mean, like some of the national heroes of Britain, that they like Sir Francis Drake. The guy, he's just a pirate. Like he's literally just a pirate. He's a good pirate and he's a good man, but piracy was never viewed as a bad thing amongst the English.
They were the punk rock guys.
Yeah, I think so. But it's that the mindset is the mindset that there is in that I am not a cog in the greater machine of civilization. That civilization is made up of us, right? So there's not a you don't have civilization up here and then I fit into it. Civilization is just an abstraction of a bunch of us and what we have been doing together. That is an English way of approaching. That's the English way of approaching the law. And over against the French, which is an imperial, which is the old Roman way, which says the Roman Empire is the thing, and we're going to find a place for you in it. Right? The individual is lost. The family is lost. The Roman, as the empire spreads. Now, there's some really great Roman philosophical thinkers that can see, well, actually, but the family is the unit. You've got people arguing for that. But they all lose the philosophical argument in the Roman Empire, and the empire becomes the thing. The abstraction becomes the reality, and then the individual real people become cogs within the imperial mindset. That we're stormtroopers. It doesn't matter. We can all put the mask on and disappear into the ranks, and because the empire is the thing. Well, the English mindset said, no, the kingdom is us. It's us. My family is my family, your family, all these families together make up the kingdom, but the kingdom isn't a real thing. It doesn't exist without us. We are together the things that become the kingdom. So the kingdom is an abstraction, or the society, the culture, I guess, is an abstraction. It's not a real thing. We are the real thing. Me and my neighbor, right? So when Alfred was getting ready to go into battle, he would walk through his soldiers, knew their names, and he would say to them, do you remember that time we had dinner together and your wife said this thing? Hey, do you remember that time your kids were out playing, and they found the frogs at the stream and then brought them home and they tried you. Do you remember that time? Right? He went through and reminded them of their homeland, reminded them of their families, reminded them of who they are. And that's what made him a great king and gave the English throne the personality that it had for so many years. So you don't have the empire, the Roman Empire being the thing, and then the people fitting into it anymore. So that when the money dries up, the army walks away. That's what you have. That's what happens to the Roman Empire. what you have is these people that love their place, they love their home, they love their family, and they're willing to fight for it, even though none of them are getting paid. A lot of them are showing up with pitchforks because they don't have weapons, and they charge in and they win battles. Right? So that mindset is embedded as well into the legal understanding of what the actual English people are, right? That what the the things like that they're a commonwealth, that we were going to talk about the Robinhood, why the story of Robinhood is so important. Robinhood is defending the Commonwealth when the king isn't, right? So the king starts saying, you can't hunt these deer. These are my deer. Robinhood says, no, the deer are the commonwealth of all the people.
Robinhood is the interposition authority, right?
Yeah. He says, you're breaking the law. You're stealing our deer. When they start taxing beyond what they're allowed, Robinhood says, no, you don't get to do that. The king is under the law. The king is subject to the law, and he's breaking the law. Now, when you don't have a judge that can step in, what do you have? Well, Robinhood is the Lord who is in this is like Zorro, right? The Lord who's in disguise as a commoner.
He's Batman.
Is using his authority to fight back when the system has been hijacked.
Bruce Wayne. Okay.
Right. Well, but here's this. This is something I've been thinking about. Think of how crazy it is that when we get to do you know Zorro? So Zorro is a Mexican lord, who goes undercover because the system has been hijacked. So he goes undercover to bring the justice that he is responsible to bring as a lord, but can't because of the systems being hijacked. The system being hijacked by basically a king that looks the other direction, by the judges being taking bribes, right? Well, this lord, he knows he still has a responsibility covenantally to take care of his people. So he has to go undercover. He puts on the mask, right? He becomes the superhero, goes undercover. When we need a superhero in America, somebody that can go undercover, we pick a billionaire. Those are our lords.
Those are aristocrats,
Our aristocrats, Our aristocrats that we think should be responsible are the billionaires. So it's inescapable to have aristocrats, I think.
That's what I was thinking. That man, I was thinking the exact same thing. It's so funny to me. So when the whole George Floyd, the summer of Floyd happened, and Minneapolis was getting torn to shreds, you saw something kind of weird happen. One of the pastors who I know there, he went to some of the gangsters there, and they started guarding certain plots of land in the community and neighborhood from outsiders who were destroying it, like some of the grocery stores. And I was like, well, that's weird, because it's always interesting. Those people who, when you start seeing the degradation of government or tyranny, the ones who are in some sort of a position of authority or power always step up, and then you can point and say, oh, they have aristocratian authority somehow. I'm trying to figure out, like, so whatever the situation is, this is almost like the new mobsters, right? Like when the government breaks down, the mob is like, that's where you go to get justice at, right? And it's like, for whatever reason, the Crips, Vice Lords, and Bloods were some sort of authority there that was able to make a mark and say, "Not this is your line," right?
Yeah. And it's not a mistake that when we wanted to tell that story, that we had to go to the old world, Sicilians, to be able to say, where can we find that mindset? Because it wasn't in America at the time, right? the American, and it there's a
Well, I mean, kind of was with cowboys. I mean, you had right the cowboy culture is that adaptation, right? And then on top of that, you have that fades out into a mafia world.
um it fades out into a mafia world, but the way you probably know this, but do you know where they went when they wanted to start coming up with the mythology of the cowboy for movies?
Wasn't that when then they go back to looking at Christ? Was that the idea?
No, no,
Oh,
the movie makers, they went to the samurai.
oh yeah, I knew that. I was thinking of the yes, you're right.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, in like Shane and old movie, you do have there's a Christ figure
Yeah,
or the outsider that shows up. He's killed. He fights for the city and then
it's
goes
always at the
away.
church. It's
Yeah,
always
it's
at the
always at the
church.
church. Um,
Always.
and when he's killed, he's always killed outside the city. You know,
Yep.
those sorts of. Yep. So there is they didn't, but what they went to for the understanding of honor, because they couldn't find it in modernism, right?
I,
That starts to go away. But so the cowboy code that they basically invent for cowboy movies is based on the samurai code of honor,
I
right?
thought that
Which
was
is
um I thought that was it's funny you say that because I'm thinking about it. I'm like, wait, hold on. I thought that was um not Greg. What is that? Not samurai. Oh, I see him in my knights and during that whole era. I thought that comes out of that.
there. I'm sure that there. Well, I'm sure because of just the imagination of the West that that's a deep part of it, um, and why we wanted it at all. Uh, the word the word thane, which becomes both our word knight and our word lord. We want lords that act like knights, right? We want
Mm-hmm.
um, gentlemen. Um, a gentleman used to be like an official position in society.
Right.
But now it describes the kind of person we want, right? But the actual filmmakers, when they said, well, where can we go to find this sort of thing,
Mm.
they had to find an old world, that because I've thought about this a lot. Like if I want to take an Old Testament story and retell it, you almost can't just set it in modern America
There's no
because
connections. Yeah.
there's no connections, right? We don't have the covenantal connections. They've been melted down. We don't have, and I think it's the solo fide that has melted it down. The understanding, the modernist understanding of uh, um, what I believe to be true becomes true. So sola fide says we get the promises from outside of us by God, and our faith is the way that those general promises become particularly mine, right? And that faith alone is the mark of justification. Faith alone um, is that's the mark of God's people, right? That's the most fundamental mark of God's people. That all the other marks are extensions of, or intended to be extensions of, our faith, of our trust in Christ, right? So baptism is the promises of God given to us as particular individuals. But faith is the way that those promises become true of us, right? They become blessings. The blessings become true of us. So solo fide says, if I believe it, it becomes true, right?
Oh,
So
that's scary. That's a lot of us nowadays.
right,
That's a lot of us nowadays.
it is. Now, if so, you can see how close it is to sola fide, because the promise that God gives, if I about people generally being saved, if I believe it, it becomes true of me, right? Now you just take God out of the picture and you get solo fide. If I believe it, it's true. It becomes no longer a move towards objective reality, but it becomes a move away from objective reality, right? It's the same road, but you're moving in different directions
That's
on it.
that's the whole American narrative, or the Western narrative, is just believe in yourself. If you just believe your dreams, if you just believe, then it's true. But there's a big difference from I'm trusting in God's promises, because and I think the charismatic movement has probably really helped screw this up for us a lot, to the point that we stopped even trusting the promises because we don't know the difference between the two. It's almost like what we do with
Yeah.
alcohol, right? It's like,
Mhm.
because it's dangerous, I'm not gonna, which is because it's dangerous, I'm not going to actually engage with this because it could be really dangerous to get this one wrong. And the way we treat alcohol, we've kind of treated faith that way too, because there's real promises that are ours in faith, but because we are afraid of kind of screwing it up, we don't touch it, right? Conquest, dominion, success, right? All these things, advancement of the gospel, real winning. Christians have become complacent because I think they're afraid of sola fide.
Yes.
Does that make sense? Because when you hear the Reform folks talk, this is how you get right now. If you listen to a lot of the Reform people, so weird. You hear them talking with being very limited in the advancement, real world application of sola fide, right? They are scared to tell you this follows that. When I say covenant obedience over time breeds success, and covenant disobedience over time breeds failure, they get really, I don't know if you can say that. And I'm like, well, what are the promises that God has given you? What are the promises God has given? Right. And so they're willing to mark those things in huge generals without any individual application. Right. And then you see the charismatic side, which is like, if you just believe for that new car, you'll get it. You know? And so there's this, go ahead.
Well, and I think it's because we don't put any of it into covenant context anymore. It all is my individual connection to Jesus. And so if it's just me and my individual connection to Jesus, and it's not in the context of a historical covenant, a generational covenant, a series of historical promises, attendant blessings, attendant curses that come with covenant, then it doesn't actually make sense to neither of those end up making sense, right? So you say, well, if you believe, then you are going to be blessed, right? Well, and you say, okay, that's true in a general sense, but we can't tell you what the blessings are. Well, in a covenant, you can. Now, you can't give the timeline of the blessings, but you can say, well, I know the children of the righteous won't be beggars, right? That's something that we know that covenant faithfulness means. My children won't be beggars. And I think it's important to remember that righteousness is the covenant keeping is by faith. Righteousness just means doing what's right. But covenant keeping is by faith and not by works, right? So when you start saying, if you do this, then you will be blessed, outside of a covenant mindset, that sounds like works righteousness. In a covenant mindset, you say, well, that's how covenants work, right? That you keep covenant by faith, and that faith and what faith looks like in a covenant context is doing is fulfilling your part of the covenant. Right? Our part of the covenant is faith, and faith works. A living faith works itself out in doing what's right, but it's not the doing what's right isn't the justifying part of a covenant, right? It's the faith is the justifying part of the covenant, and the grounds of that justification is the death and resurrection of Jesus and our unity with Christ by means of our baptism and the Spirit's work in our life, right? The Word and the Spirit, right? All of those things are present in a covenant context. You take it out of a covenant context,
Yeah, you got
and
trouble.
suddenly
Yeah.
you got the reason you have trouble is because now the historical order becomes my works, God's blessing.
Mm,
Right? In a covenant,
mm.
the historical order started way before you were born, and you were grafted into a historical order that has been running and rolling, and God's works are in the past, and but in Christ's work, very past, in the creative work, in Christ's redemptive work, and in the present, in the Spirit's work. But the present Spirit's work is not suddenly beginning with you. You're grafted into it, right? So in that context, then you can say what Solomon says, which is the children of the righteous have never become beggars, right? So it's not works righteousness. So you take it out of the covenant context, and the fear of works righteousness coming in, I think, is a real fear, because you're not in, because the historical order suddenly becomes my works, then God's blessing. And
Boy, it's funny as you're saying this. I can see, especially my earlier Christian life, not having that gave me so much unease.
Mhm.
Right? Like I was in, and I think that people use things like sanctification and to help put me at ease and say, okay, here's you're all right. This is just sanctification. I think that's great and that's helpful.
Yeah.
But the thing that even makes that work is understanding the historical relationship you are in. Like that is the thing that really anchors you, because all of those things have been functioning before you got here, and you're in the stream of covenantal links that are unbroken.
Right.
Right. And so now when you see that and you see these links over time that are connected, that you didn't strive to connect, you can trust that the links in the future from your children on are going to be connected because you weren't the one doing it. So then your faith is strengthened by having such a strong historical looking back at what has been done, right? And say, oh, well,
Right.
look at God. He's been doing this way before I got here. He's promised to continue to do it way after I leave. So now I rest and work, right?
Right.
Because I'm
right.
trusting in him. But I think we forget so much of the historical connection. Everything now, including even this conversation is that, and we haven't said this conversation around what France is doing and what the whole Olympic, this is not in some vacuum outside of historical connections, covenantal connections, right? And so I was going to ask, what else is there that we're missing in this narrative that we should be paying attention to?
I think at the heart of it was an attempt to declare freedom from God's limitations. Right? Now, freedom from God's limitations, they even said, we understand that that in the French Revolution that led to a bloodbath, and we're okay with that. Right? And now Dionysus, they say, and Dionysus sits at the head of our Lord's Supper. All right, and when they actually put it up there, it was called the Lord's Supper. They knew exactly what they were doing. So when they come out and they say, well, no, we weren't trying to replace the Lord's Supper. So then you shouldn't have called it the Lord's Supper, because you were trying to. But
wait. They actually put it up there, the Lord's Supper?
Yeah.
When the first time, because they cut it.
Yeah, when it was live in French underneath it, they called it the Supper of the Lord, right? The Lord's Supper, and then it was Dionysus as up. So, well, Dionysus was the meal, actually, if I remember right. Right, he was the
little blue guy. Yeah, he was
the meal, right? And then that the big woman was Christ.
That's interesting. So they were communicating, this is my body.
right. The Dionysus's body is the one on the table, right? So, and what that says is that we believe that we have freed ourselves from the limitations of reality, right? We freed ourselves from the limitations, so that's why we can put all of these different, transvestites and people at this table and declare that now these are our apostles, right? These are the ones leading us into the future, because they're the ones that have thrown off reality, right? They're the ones that have thrown off. So now these apostles are leading us into the future of a new age, a new world. And Dionysus is the meal that frees us from reality. The body of Dionysus is the meal that frees us from reality, which is the throwing off of the limitations of reality. That is modernism, right? They're just declaring that modernism has won, because Machiavelli, who is the father of the Enlightenment, or the grandfather of the Enlightenment, maybe you'd say, that was his, at the heart of his project was that if mankind can be, if the power of mankind can be gathered to one point in the state, then mankind will have gained power over reality, right? Because nature doesn't, or because there isn't a nature to reality. So mankind will have gained power over reality if they can gather all authority into the state. So when you have, so that's what makes the French Revolution make sense. You have the people that opposed the full centralization and bureaucratizing of the state. They had to be killed, because if you have a free radical outside of the system, then you don't have all of the power gathered, and so you won't have power over reality. But they were declaring in that work of art that we have now gathered the power to over reality, and that the LGBTQ are our apostles into this new future.
The
right?
new
That's
priestess.
the new priests and priestesses. I don't know what term you're supposed to use, because
what is their gospel?
Well, their gospel is this is why it is it never ends up working, because I think there's two aspects to their gospel, and they don't, and that can't actually fit together.
It just floats away like balloons.
It just floats away like balloons. There's two aspects. One is that the centralization of power will give mankind sovereignty over reality. That is, you see that everywhere, right? You see, but then the other aspect is it will give you freedom to fulfill all of your desires. Right? So but you have to shrink the desires of mankind into things that they can do while in a cage, because they end up being put into a cage in order to centralize power. So they shrink mankind's desires down to orgasm, basically. We will give you dopamine hits. You'll get all the dopamine hits you want. We shrink mankind, the individual desires, down to that, and then anyone that has desires beyond that has to be cut out of the system.
I was going to ask, that's really interesting, because as you're saying that, I'm writing down freedom of sexuality is all humans are good for, right? Like, it's funny when you say that, like, they're really shrinking down. You're right, it's everything you could do in a cell, but it's all sexual. There's nothing else that's there really. That's not um there's not a robust human uh flourishing type mentality. It's just sexual. All
Right.
of it is just sexual.
It's anti-humanist. It opposes the flourishing or the expansion, the humanization of people into creatures beyond you know, their orgasmic desires.
Well, it's redefining it that humans are only are primarily sexual. That's all they are.
Primarily, here's one of the, and here's some more evidence of that, because I don't know if you've seen people that keep saying, well, the guy that painted the Lord's Supper was gay, so it makes complete sense. Um, that's just a complete historical lie, literally made up by Freud, right? He wrote an essay on Da Vinci's latent homosexuality or hidden oppressed homosexuality that he has discovered through his paintings.
All the stuff that Floyd is, yeah.
So Freud, he writes an essay saying, well, he was secretly gay, just couldn't come out because society was so if you remember, Freud had the id, which is the desires that we have within us, the superego, which is the expectations of society that's over us. Those two things come into conflict and create the ego, which is our experience of ourself, right? The I am, the ego, the experience of ourself. Our self-awareness is created by the conflict between the expectations of society and my actual desires. And so so when we talk about, repressed homosexuality, that Freud was saying that Da Vinci's repressed homosexuality was expressed in his paintings, because he thought that the human body and the male body was a beautiful machine, things like that. And you say, well, that's really because he just wants to sleep with it. There was an accusation of that he had visited a male prostitute, that he had to go answer for. Da Vinci had to go answer for, but it was thrown out because there's a box in the center of the city where you could, it was the equivalent of like a police helpline, or not helpline, a call line where you call in, you say, hey, there's there's people selling drugs across the street. The equivalent of that, because they didn't have phones, you would write down, I saw this crime being committed by this person, and put it in the box. But it was an unsigned accusation, and so they couldn't take it seriously because it's not a real accusation, an unsigned accusation. So they brought him in and said, oh, there's this accusation, and then they threw it out. And so imagine you've got
the Me Too movement before it was popular.
Well, yeah, or you have a bunch of dudes hanging out, drinking wine in an Italian evening, and they're like, what would be funny?
Yeah,
let's Da Vinci's a sodomite. Boom. Ha ha ha. Like, people haven't changed. That's exactly what would happen now, right?
Yeah.
An unsigned accusation can't be admissible in court, and that's the whole. Because you can't answer your accuser. It's a fundamental.
It can when you change the order of how creation works.
Well, yeah, it could, but back then they understood that you'd actually, that it would be unjust to do that. So there's literally no evidence outside of Freud's secret way of finding repressed desires. So now you've got people saying, well, that painting was by a homosexual, so this is actually a better use of the imagery or whatever. But that's literally just, it's historical ignorance. Freud was a complete fraud. He's not a real scholar. He's a fraud. even even all of his supposed scientific research all turned out to have been faked.
Yep. They
He
still teach it though in
they
schools.
do still teach it. Well, and we should know his philosophical system so that we can recognize when somebody is using it. But
Right.
he said that so he fits perfectly into a centralizing, a statist system, because he said mankind is ultimately his fundamental desire is for sexual, right? He is a sexual creature fundamentally, and so if we provide the sexual release that mankind needs, then we have given him everything that he actually needs. And so we can centralize and get rid of every other thing. As long as we provide that, we are still the good guys. And so Freud's understanding of mankind is actually needed for globalists, right? The global homogenizers, they it are global homos in multiple ways, right?
Yeah.
Because they need to be able to say, well, we are actually giving them what they need. They need food, they need shelter, and they need orgasm. And then you've got and we've done everything that the people need, and we're good slave masters if we give them that sort of thing. But this is why Carl Jung, I think, is seen as the conservative. He was Freud's student who rejected it and said, no, that is a dehumanizing philosophy. And he tried to create he tried to create a humanistic understanding of humans. He eventually he started out as a Christian and then eventually leaves the faith, so there's some odd stuff there. But he was rejecting Freud and trying to make a more human psychology. I don't think he ultimately succeeds, but that's why he's the conservative side, on the conservative side of everything right now. That's why all of the Jungians are rejecting the homogenization, the centralization.
Right.
Because they don't hold to a version of an anthropology, I guess, a version of mankind that
their anthropology is still Christian saturated, if not Christian.
Yeah. Yep.
One of the things that was interesting to me, there's still a couple things that I'm playing with in my head after thinking about. I don't think people have thought richly or deeply enough about the Olympic celebration and the start of it. And it started making me think about the Olympics period. And I haven't figured out how to put all this into thought, but I'm just going to let it spill out here. There's two things. Globalism has been at play for a very long time.
Right.
And it seems like they're getting closer and closer to actually getting that type of narrative to play strong. Although they overplayed their hand. I don't think people are paying attention to this. They overplayed their hand with this one, and they weren't expecting the blowback that they got from it, because they had, by the time I found it, which was hours after it was posted, they had already re-edited the versions that were on all the televisions. Hours, at least I think 4 hours after they had played, within 4 hours, they had already had a different edit inside the television version that I went to go watch. So they got massive blowback on this. And I didn't think that they expected this thing. The Christians are dead. We've won. We've got the day. We'll be fine. That wasn't the case. What were we going to say, Jason?
Well, I think they all live in such an echo chamber that they have no idea.
Yeah, they had no idea. And the other thing that I thought was really interesting, first of all, the fact that the Christians made so much fuss about this and not other things was really telling to me. I didn't like that. The whole library scene with the menage a trois. Did you see the whole opening where there's this gay dude in the library who's looking at this female who's, we don't know, she seems she can go both ways, and then there's another dude, and they're just in the library reading books about sex and other things like that, and then they find each other, and then did you see that whole scene?
No, I didn't see that one.
Oh,
I watched clips because I couldn't find the whole thing in one.
yeah. Oh, so then and then you would get way more. I should find it for you because there's way more to that than I probably even able to see. But it was clear it was a black guy, white girl, white dude, and they're running through the library, and at some point they throw a bunch of pages up. And no, it's not a thumbs up, it's a thumbs down, people. This is a thumbs down. This is what we're doing. Thumbs down. And they throw all these papers up in the air of some semblance of freedom, and we're not doing this or whatever. And then they run into a room. Stop with the thumbs up. They run into the room. I gotta stop talking like Trump. And they start kissing on each other, and they close the door. And this just these three, and I'm like, whoa, they just did this in front of our kids. They just did this in front of the world, that this is okay. And so this is a part of French culture, super flamboyant colors. And then they're outside in the street with these people hanging on poles and flinging themselves back and forth on these poles with super bright colors and super gay. And so after all of this and this stuff is going on, they get to the end. And I think it was, Celine Dion was at the end, but there's this huge call for unity and togetherness and one world all together. And this is what peace looks like. There's some sort of song, this is what peace looks like. They're calling for peace. And at the ceremony, it was a worship service. It was a worship service. And it was, and I don't know if they intentionally did this part, but it was a kind of worship service that Revelation talks about, where every tribe, every tongue, every nation is represented underneath this one idea, right? And they're singing their praises to their king. And I'm like, there, you can escape an eschatology touching down on earth, right? You cannot, you cannot. It was so clear to me that they're trying to resemble the kind of peace that only comes through the Prince of Peace. They are trying to create the kind of reality that we're going to get one day apart from Christ, though. That's what they're trying to do. They're like, we're going to do it without God. We're going to do it without Jesus. And so they did their Lord's Supper in the midst. It was a full narrative. Here's where we started. Here's what the things we went through in the middle. They rolled out their whole Bible. They rolled out their whole historical narrative. And then at the end, they also rolled out their eschatology. It was, as I'm looking at this, I'm like, forget this, the one scene. That's one scene. Did you guys see what they're doing? And you guys understand that they're telling us, they're retelling. I mean, leave it to the French to retell the narrative, right? They're retelling a story.
Well, the French Revolution, they tried to restart the calendar at zero.
Right, exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Because they really actually believe that the blood the revolutionaries spilled was a new messianic blood atonement, right? That and this is, you have the same, the Marx picks up this same understanding. The Russian Revolution, Pol Pot, all of them, they believe that spilling the blood of your own people in revolution gives you what Jesus's blood gave you, right? That it's that the death is going to lead to a resurrection, and that's why Marxism is a religion. It's not a philosophy. The revolutionary understanding, and it's a religion. It's a the French nationalists, nationalism in France was a alternate religion to Christianity, and they believed that that you had to get to the resurrection, you had to have death but France had to die to get to the resurrection, and so they killed all of those people, and they treated the blood the way that the blood of Christ was treated. Right? That they turned around and turned them into heroes, which is the pagans used to do that all of the time. This is not something new. When Jesus ended the bloodletting of pagans as well as the sacrificial system of the Israel, the sacrificial system of Moses, and Abraham, and the whole business. So but we don't actually have a complete Christian story to replace it with in most of the American church. I mean,
What do you,
we don't come in presenting an alternate.
No, you're right. Here's we present a partial narrative that has some version of loss, lack of success here on earth, or pushed out success, not one that is already dominated and won, but one that is potentially delayed, right? So it's an eschatological conversation. It really is. It's not really, but it is, because they're arguing for a conquering that actually has an effect on earth right now, that actually has some success in it right now. We have that, which is why if we don't, the only reason the Great Commission works is because Christ really has conquered the world.
Right.
If he hasn't conquered the world, then the gospel doesn't have any ability to have success in the world. But because Christ has conquered, he's the real authority, he's the real king, and the king is telling people to go out and tell other folks that their world has been conquered. Their gods have lost. And so our gospel is the gospel of the conquering king who has conquered. And we're telling everybody else, this is the laws, this is the reality, this is the world that the king now has established on planet Earth. Not in the future, somewhere out there. No, it is here now. This is how you live. This is how you obey. And this is what the kingdom is turning into, right? As the message goes forth. We don't hold that second part of that in any sort, we don't hold it to the ground. We don't hold it to reality. And so we have the ability. So that's why we only protect the center gooey part of the gospel. So this is why everything else at the Olympic opening ceremony was fair ground. We were cool with most of what happened because nothing really attacked the gooey side of the gospel except for the Dionysus part.
Right.
That was the gooey center of the gospel. And we were like, whoa. We'll let you have the culture.
You're right.
We'll let you have the art. We'll let you have the sex and all that other stuff. But you can't touch the gooey side of the gospel. Right? And because we don't have, like you were saying, an understanding of what the gospel does in time and space right now here on earth, we give all of that up to them. And they're like, we'll take your scraps and then we'll come from your gooey center.
Right. Well, I think this is why the only successful Christian movie recently has been The Chosen. This is why the art in the church is so shallow. What's hard is there are good artists out there. The problem is not the artists. The problem is in the pulpits, we don't get a full orbed enough, preaching of the word that people come to value the things that Christ values, right? They don't come to value the dominion mandate. They don't come to value, so you don't have you don't have you have a retreat everywhere that where we should be advancing. And
Yeah, because, and I'll just add to that. I'm sorry, you got it. You were in your thought. I'll shut up.
I was going to say, and they have continued to advance. So us getting out of the way.
Where we've let them, though.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Us getting out of the way hasn't. I think we thought, well, if we get out of the way, it's going to give us opportunities to preach the gospel. Or I don't know. I honestly don't know what we thought.
I know what we thought. That stuff doesn't matter. That's what we thought. It's the GUI center. We have completely regulated the Christian gospel to the GUI center, and that's it. And anywhere that the GUI center comes under attack, around that area, we are hardcore to protect it. But this is why we can feel comfortable sending our kids to government schools, because math is just math. Science is just science. Art is just art. But it's not Christian. That's neutral.
But do you think it's because we actually don't know?
I love when you ask questions, because you're not really asking a question.
Our own.
Just say it, Jason. Just say I was wrong in what you really think it is.
No. That's not at all it. So we have in 1 Corinthians, Paul talks about the table. I was gonna look that up for you, and I never finished.
Oh, yes, that's right.
1 Corinthians 10:21 is where Paul says there's competing tables. We've got competing tables, but we've also got competing mythologies, in the sense of a mythology is the story that a people tell to explain their origins, the origins of all things, the origins of their own. We have taken the word myth and turned it into meaning not true. Rather than
a story.
And so then we don't recognize our own myths, but myth doesn't mean not true. A myth meant it was a myth is the story that you tell to justify your existence, to give your origins, to give your an identity to a people, right? So usually your own myths are just invisible to you, the stories that you actually tell. But what I'm wondering is, because the church has basically just accepted the myths handed to it by the world, right? So we don't know our own. We haven't fought for the myths of our society, right? We haven't. It was like 1.7% of families owned slaves, but we have let that become the myth of America, right? So the 1619 Project, for example.
Dang, more people than had abortions than who owned slaves.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's it's crazy that we have I mean, and I'm with Walker Percy on the problem of that slavery gives to that gave to America. The American psyche was injured by slavery. The American understanding of masculinity was injured by slavery. That all of that, I think, slavery as an institution was a bad choice. It should have been. It was illegal. It should have been confirmed as illegal. All that. But it also wasn't the major. That shouldn't be the myth of the founding of America, the way that we tell it that way, right? Because the story of people fleeing religious persecution and establishing a place of freedom, the story of people taking with them the values of Christendom, and and crossing an ocean in order to establish a new place where the values of the values of the worship of Christ could be established. That Western civilization, with Western civilization in their hearts, the Pilgrims left the place where Western civilization was crumbling to establish a new beacon of hope and the expansion of with the civilizing power of the gospel. You know, there are great stories that we should be telling about the founding of America, but we haven't fought for those stories, or we haven't fought for that. We haven't fought for the mythology of America. We just have. So I guess what I'm wondering is,
well, okay, yeah, keep going. I'll let you finish.
I guess what I'm wondering is, do we even? Because I think
do you even America, bro?
Important.
Do you even America?
So, like, I think it just was a wholesale giving up of society, a wholesale giving up of civilization. Right? We said we'll take the upper story, we'll take the
yes.
religious
yes.
story, and
Correct.
we'll leave all
yes
of the lower story.
That's
alone.
my argument. That's been my argument. It's yes. But this happened this is your argument. This happened in our education first, right? And from that, it bled over everywhere else, which is when I look at the Southern Baptist Convention and I look at the largest Christian institution in America, it still has that bifurcation there that you're talking about, but it's still Christianity huge, America not so huge, but very important, right? These two are still there. And so that's why all the elitism that's trying to get in, all the globalists are trying to get inside of the SBC, because that's the last place of that residue, of that pillar that's still there that you're talking about. That's the last place. Now, I'm not saying that it's there greatly or perfectly, but you won't find any other institution that strong with both of those two things. And it's because you've had the some of the separatists there. You've had the education that's been there has separated those two things from being together really well, understanding how they come together. But you have that because you have the fundamentalists there. All the people that didn't go, which is the only reason why the SBC hasn't completely fallen off its rocker, is because it's got a lot of the people that didn't go the large institution way, right? It's made up. And so I'm not saying it's perfectly there, but it's the last place that hasn't completely fallen, right? It is, it's kind of in Lord of the Rings. It's one of the last places. It doesn't have great leadership, but the gates are still open. The people are still fighting. It's still a place to fight from. And so I think that's why the SBC is important. I wonder, what were you going to say? Because I saw you had an idea as I was talking.
Well, I just realized something. The unwillingness to stand against the institution of slavery was us taking the upper story and ignoring the lower story.
Absolutely. I think that's Joel McDermott's point in the Two Kingdom, in his book that he wrote on slavery. I think his last good book, personally. And I love Joel. He just doesn't love me. But he wrote that book, Slavery in America. I can't remember what the title of it was. And I read it. And to me, his whole argument was Two Kingdom theology, a lack of postmillennial understanding, destroyed our ability to fight against slavery in America and took us, right?
Well, it's absolutely historically true that after that slavery was the slavery was what was used to dislodge
Yep.
pastors from holding public offices. So that slavery was the argument for the privatization of the church, or that
Yep.
the church was part of the private sphere, not the public sphere. So the public offices held by ordained ministers were dissolved in order to keep slavery. Um, it, and
Well,
but here's the realization that I had. So when the globalists come in and they try to use slavery as the guilt manipulation tactic in the SBC, because I've seen, because they did the same, they've done the same thing in the Presbyterian Church, they've done the
yep.
same thing.
Yep.
Um,
They got us.
what they are, it's modernism and the Enlightenment that argued for slavery. So for them to now come in and say, hey, you Christians, you were the ones that allowed this slavery. You were the ones that, look at you all and your slave owning.
It's like the Democrats.
Yeah, it's like the Democrats coming in and saying, oh, the Republicans, they were the defenders of slavery, where we came in and we freed the slaves. You're like, wait, but that's just historically inaccurate. Well, Christianity has been the slave freeing force in the world.
Yep.
It is a slave freeing religion, but I think the word religion has changed its name. When I say religion, I mean a public thing. They mean a private thing. So, but it's been the slave freeing force throughout history. And so when they come in and they say, well, y'all defended slavery, the response should be, no, the Enlightenment was the slave that was pro-slavery.
Yeah.
Right? Christendom has been anti-slavery. That's just historically accurate.
Here's where I want to end at. One, did you get it all out? I'm sure you didn't. Around the imagery and the art and the communication around the ceremonial opens. That's one. So think about that one. And two is, what do you do in light of that? Because that's such a huge thing, but it touches down everywhere. And so when you see something like that take place on such a massive stage, what is our response to something like that? And that's not just like, let me go to social media and complain. Not saying that hurt, because it looked like it had some effect. But what's the real, because that stuff is so deeply entrenched to get, that was a massive performance. And it took, people are not catching this. This was a massive performance that took all of France to display, right? They used every building there to communicate their narrative. This was the idea of ownership. This is who we are. And it's not just who we are as France. No, France is the tip of the spear for who we are as a global nation.
Right. So there's two things that I think are really important. One is Christian art used to be so good that they're still having to respond to it 600 years later. Da Vinci was such a great Christian artist that they're still having to try and respond to it. This is why Machiavelli said that Dante is he said Dante is the greatest threat to centralization, or is the greatest obstacle to centralization in that the world has ever produced, because of the effect that he has on the imagination of the Italian people. That we need to go back to actually making art, training artists. We're in a story. We've been in a storytelling fight since the Garden of Eden. The devil came in with an alternate story, and Adam fell to that story, right? Adam and Eve fell to his story. But it's a storytelling battle. It's a storytelling war that we're in. It is a war of art, and we don't produce art. We don't value art, right? So you don't have culture, you don't have society unless you have artifacts. Um, so we our we think we're in a war for society without a society, right? We live in response to their art. But look at what their art is having to respond to. Their art is still having to respond to Da Vinci. Their art is still having to respond to the great architects of Christendom. Right? They couldn't have done any of what they did if it weren't for the great Christian artists, architects, artisans of the past. We used to build garden cathedrals. We used to build garden royal palaces to symbolize that our royalty was a reflection of Adam and Eve. Our royalty is a reflection of Christ and the church. Our royalty is a reflection of the good things that Christ has done in the world and his reestablishment of his gardenization of the world, right? That we were building garden cities because garden cities were coming. We used to build royal cathedrals that way. They're not going to put their art in response to some salt and pepper modernist cement building. Right? They had to put it on the side of a of a royal building that was built to look like the Garden of Eden. So they're still having to respond to the art of Christendom. And then we have no artistic response anymore. So I think this is why we've got to build schools. We've got to educate kids. We've got to restore society, the kind of society in the church that produces art, because we're in a storytelling war and we are not valuing storytellers. So I think the heart of what's happening is we have let them, the barbarians have come through the gates, and now the barbarians are standing on our art saying, look what we've made. and we're just like, we get upset, which I think there's a reason to be upset, but we need to fight back in an actual effective way.
Okay, I'll hold that. I'll hold that. Go for your next one.
So I think the first is they are actually responding to our art, and we're not realizing that, right? Our art was that effective for that long. And the second is we need to now start training up the next generation of artists. We couldn't have put on something like that. We don't have the artists, the patrons, right? We don't have that anymore, and we need to rebuild that whole system.
That's it. That's your last one. That's
my last thing. I mean, I think we got. Is that disappointing?
Yeah, that was quick. I expected a little more on the second one. That was
well.
But it kind of sounds like the first one. So,
but there are talented Christian artists out in the world right now. But talented Christian filmmakers, talented. There are plenty of talented people. They're all having to work for secularists and use their gifts for secular entertainment if they want to be paid what they're worth. So, I mean,
why are you always so concerned about the art, Jason? Come on, bro. Like,
I mean, they just got an opportunity to tell their entire story to the world because they're good at art.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We're told that you will stand before kings if you're good at your art, if you're good at your job, and that this just proves it. Because what you can't say about what they did was that it wasn't skilled. it was a highly skilled
Yes, that's true.
performance. It was just in service of evil.
I'm trying to find this opening for you.
But this is why I texted earlier in the week that we should talk about the Marquis de Sade. And then
You
this
did,
came up, and I was like, "Yeah, we should have talked about the Marquis de Sade." There it is on.
what's the Marquis de Sade? Maybe give me a taste before.
So
Is it gonna?
our word sadism comes from the Marquis
Say
de Sade.
sadism?
Sadism, using pain for sexual pleasure.
Oh,
So he was the one who he put together a philosophical argument and published some books, and then he ended up going to prison because he acted out his books. But where because there is no real nature, and it's only force holding things in this particular shape, that sexual pleasure is the highest of all pleasures, and so whatever brings sexual pleasure needs to be legalized. And for him, what brought sexual pleasure was causing pain to women. And so he would write books about causing pain to women, and he was a marquis, meaning he was a minor lord. But his philosophy is actually now central to a lot of the globalists, that it's all just power, and the only real pleasure is sexual pleasure. And so the exercise of power over others for means of sexual pleasure needs to be legalized. So it's what's behind all of the people pushing for. It's the philosophy that makes the people that are pushing for things like legalization of pedophilia. What makes them think they're the good guy. He gives the metaphysical argument that you're the good guy, even if you're a sadist and a masochist. You can still be the good guy. There's a metaphysical argument behind it. But so you can see that you see that they know exactly what they're trying to say, and they're saying it through images, through motion, through all of that.
No confusion about what they're trying to communicate.
No confusion at all. Our difficulty is we haven't been consistently presenting a better story. We need to, because we haven't been presenting a consistently better story about what the family is really for, and the beauty and the glory of marriage as God intended it. We've been presenting a we just haven't even been talking about that stuff. For there were multiple generations that there weren't Christians poetically expressing the beauty and glory of marriage, poetically expressing the glory of multi-generational thing, or long-term multi-generational thinking. We fell to the generation gap, that we fell to the myth of the rivalry of the generations just as hard as everyone else in the American church. And so, until we can restore an understanding that says, I'm doing this for my grandkids, my great grandkids, we're going to work on our marriage for the sake of our grandkids and our great grandkids. I'm going to garden this plot that God gave me, and part of that is growing up gardeners who are going to go out and conquer the wilds. Right? Unless, we have to really, I think, work at restoring the story that God has given us, and become good at telling it, good at living it, telling the same story with our life that God is telling about our life. I mean, that's what faith is. And it- we otherwise, I mean, if that looks attractive to our kids, then we have failed. Our kids should look at that and say, why would you want that? Look at what mom and dad have. That's what I want. Why would you want that? Look at what, you know, uh, grandma and grandpa and mom and dad and aunts and uncles and all the people in my church. Like they have something so much better than that. But we've got to actually live that out.
Sorry, I had to write that down because I'm still in that too. I'm gonna tell you. Go ahead.
This is why I'm planning on doing 50 episodes on the mission of God for the family at the Substack.
As soon as I saw that, the first thing that I thought, and I saw it on social media before I actually watched the whole thing. I didn't see that. I saw some other things. I just saw all the drag queen stuff. But I tell you, we do a great job promoting everybody else's filth, don't we? Man,
yeah, we do.
I don't follow the kind of people that stuff should have been in my feed, but man, everybody else. And I think I can understand. I can validate part of it because I think in one sense, it's the chopping up of the body and sending it off to the other nations. I think that's important to see, the concubine, right? So I think that, so I can get it. But one of the first things that came to my head as soon as I got a glimpse of that, I'm going to go home. I'm going to make sure that I kiss my wife right in front of all my kids for just a little bit longer than they feel comfortable, right? And I wanted to go home and I wanted to let my wife know that there isn't another woman more beautiful than her to me. And I wanted to go home and I wanted to make sure that my sons know that I am very grateful for their strength to protect their sisters. And I wanted my daughters to know that they are beautiful and they're like pillars of a nation. And I'm so grateful for them. I wanted to go home and I wanted to strengthen my family because what you just said to me resonates very, very deeply. If our kids think that is attractive, then we've failed.
Yeah.
Right. Then we've failed. And part of the reason that can be attractive because they make it look so fun, right? They make it look so, look at this freedom. Look what you're getting away from. Like, it's just, and we don't display the beauty of the marriage bed. Well, like, oh, kids, you're here because your daddy loves your mama and your mama loves your daddy. And we have so many of you because we love each other. And we're so grateful for that. And God is blessed. I mean, one of the areas that Christians don't know how to do is party well and enjoy the blessings of God. We don't know how to feast. And when we don't know how to feast, then we don't get festivals from it. And this isn't, I'll talk about this on Cross Politic today. As all this is going on, there was something simultaneously happening in my culture and community that made all of this fizzle out to me. There was a music camp happening here in Moscow that happens. I can't remember the Shananaya music event. I think it is. I always call it, say it wrong, get it wrong. But this event had 460 kids at it. And so I was coming to Park to hear this conference that had been going on for all week. They were going to have a concert on the last day. And I was going to Park to go to the concert. And at this church where the seating is like 1,500 people for seating. And I couldn't find a parking spot because every place was filled inside of the parking lot and around it. And so there was no parking. And so while the whole Olympics opening is going on, this little thing is happening up there where we are planted, there's a huge event of 460 kids who are learning how to do war and art through learning music, being capable of art and singing and proclaiming the reality of their historical narrative in song. And I was like, I have felt extremely hopeful.
Right.
Right. I feel like that's nothing. Right. I just like, that's not going to hold up. That's not going to hold up because they can't do this. This is how the world really works. This is how blessings really come. And anything that doesn't come this way through here will be failure, will fall apart, and it won't succeed. And I knew that. And I was happy at that moment, not being able to find a parking spot. And I said, Lord, may next year I have to park further. Right. That was my,
Right.
and I'm like, what does it look like then for several of these to be taking place throughout America? Right, where in every town, in every city, something like this is going on, where it's 4, 5, 6, 700 kids who are gathering together. These kids coming out of Egypt, right? This next generation going to take over the land, and they're learning the songs of their forefathers. You know, it's just like, oh, we're so winning. Like, I
Right.
was encouraged through that. It just,
Well, and yeah, we've been planning my daughter's wedding
yes, right.
in the
That's
midst
right.
of all of it. And so it's like, yeah, the Olympics aren't that important. I mean, they are, but you can't get to the Olympics, right? You can't say, you know what, let's take a next in 4 years, let's run the Olympics, right? You can't do that.
Right.
But what you can do is build a home that full, fill it up with kids, fill it up with grandkids that look at that and they say, ugh, why would you want that? There's such a better way to live. There's such a more fulfilling way to live. Like, who would want what guy wants would want that? What girl would want that? It's just to build that in a home and church and life that makes it untenably ugly. That reveals what it is, which is untenably ugly.
Yeah. Yeah. Did we talk about all the stuff you wanted to talk about? I don't think so.
Yeah.
Did we?
So.
Good. Oh, so then what's next week? We're going back to hit more harder on King Alfred because we kind of talked about Robinhood. I think I would like. Can we do one more King Alfred?
Yeah.
A little deeper on King Alfred. What should we read between now and next week that might be helpful to have a deeper conversation on Alfred? Because yeah.
Can I send you some poetry?
Oh. Nah, I hate poetry. Nah, send it to me. Let's do it.
Okay.